Hello and welcome to another edition of Unrendered. My guest on this edition is Mrs. Indera Sagewan-Alli. She's the Executive Director of the Caribbean Center for Competitiveness. Indera, welcome to St. Vincent. I know you're no stranger here, but welcome nonetheless to the studios of IKTV.
Thank you very, very much.
Pleasure to have you.
Pleasure
Now
to
we're
be here.
talking about the Caribbean Center for Competitiveness, and this is something that resides within the University of the West Indies. Tell me, what is the Caribbean Center for Competitiveness?
Well, the center is, first to begin with, a regional center, hence the name, the Caribbean Center for Competitiveness.
Right.
It was set up about 2 years ago. I came in as the first executive director to the center. It is run through donor funding from the IADB, CEDA, and DFID at this point in time. So it's a partnership arrangement between those donor agencies and the University of the West Indies. It is an attempt by the university to bridge the gap between the notion of pure research and criticism that the university is not responsive enough to the needs of the private sector. So the center is intended really to bridge that missing gap then, so to speak, so that its purpose then coming out of that is to support private sector competitiveness, to work with regional governments, with regional private sector organizations to build private sector competitiveness.
You've been around for 2 years, and basically, who have you engaged thus far? Tell me some of the things that you've been doing.
Sure. Well, coming in, one of the important things that I had to do as the executive director was to really determine the strategic niche that the center should in fact fill. Because remember, we have business schools, we have the university offering degree programs in business management, we have private institutions doing some of these things. So the first challenge was to identify the niche that the center can take ownership of, the gap that exists, and to really seek to fill that. So I looked at the world and I looked at new trends with respect to what was happening in terms of building private sector competitiveness and where it was being done successfully and through what kinds of methodology. That led me to 2 particular areas. One being the whole notion of clustering and cluster mapping, and the godfather of that, as you would know, Michael Porter. And then the whole area of value chain analysis, and which is very, very important in terms of understanding where the products are that you produce, where it is along the global value chain. And when you understand that, you can determine what are the kind of backward and forward linkages that you can create in terms of moving forward. So those are the 2 areas then that the center identified. And then the next step was to build technical capacity within the region, because it is one thing to identify the area, the other thing is to be able to deliver. So what we have done over the last 2 years is to bring cutting-edge trainer programs in clustering, cluster mapping in particular, and global value chain analysis to the region. And I have, therefore, through that, I have hosted about 4 workshops where I have brought regional people from private sector, academia, and public sector institutions, brought them together and trained them in very, very practical tools of to use cluster mapping and global value chain analysis. Participants, because I'm very committed to this not just being training that people go back and do nothing with. Part of the requirement was that the participants use the tools that they learned during the workshop and go back to their respective countries and actually use it and apply it to a particular industry. So coming out of that, we actually had some successful cluster mapping done. And what do I mean by cluster mapping? I think it's interesting for me to explain that. Cluster mapping is a process that allows us to be able to understand where we are with respect to an industry, to be able to identify the number of firms that exist in an industry. So if we use an example, if we take the tourism industry in St. Vincent, if we wanted to cluster map that industry, through that process, we will determine the number of firms that are involved in tourism. What are the range of tourism products that we offer, and again link that into the who are the suppliers of those things. We will be able to understand what are all of the inputs along the entire value chain, from the conceptual stage of a tourism sector to the actual delivery to the customer, wherever the customer
So the clusters would be things like restaurants, obviously.
Correct, yes.
Hotels.
Yes.
taxis,
Yes.
taxi operators,
The full gamut.
water sports.
Yes,
So all
yes.
these make up the
Yes,
different clusters
yes.
within the industry.
Precisely,
Yeah.
because it is all too often, we in the region identify sectors to go forward on without doing this kind of analysis. We don't even really have a sense of where we are. Where within that we've also now talked about value chain. Where within that value chain we have comparative and competitive advantage that we can build on. And sometimes we simply identify almost intuitively areas that we feel we want to go into because we've heard somebody somewhere else say that, you know, this is where they're going. But without the analysis, we cannot determine for certain that we have the basis on which to be able to move forward.
Now these economies, and you know, we're talking about the Caribbean, and these economies have been traditionally centered around the lower end of the value chain.
Yes.
And I mean, that's our history because we were primary producers and largely, in a lot of aspects, we've remained that way. The banana industry is a typical example of this, okay? You know, you are a primary producer of bananas, and that's it.
Yes.
You export the fresh produce. Cane in Barbados, to an extent, you know, they refine it to make sugar. They make rum, you know, so that has added some value, okay? But what are the challenges now coming from that sort of legacy in actually understanding where we can pick off the best value in the whole chain, given the fact that we are instinctively almost grown up on just being primary producers?
And that is the one problem to identify, the fact that where in the value chain that we have operated and continue to operate by and large. But the second challenge has been the monocrop nature of our economies. Whether we're talking about energy in Trinidad and Tobago, or we're talking agriculture, we're talking bananas in St. Vincent, we have continued to depend
on one thing,
too heavily on one thing, and we have failed to diversify our economic base. Yes? So that is one thing. The other issue, and again come back to the tool that is global value chain analysis. It helps us to be able to identify where the trends in the market is going. So if we take banana, for example, do we simply sit down, you and I, and say, well, you know, maybe we need to make banana chips, yeah, and sell it. But have we understood who we want to sell it to? Do we know who are buying, who are the buyers of the banana chip? Do we understand who are currently the suppliers of the banana chip? Do we understand what are the standards that we need to meet in order to enter the market? And can we compete? Do we understand the price points in terms of what our competitors are producing at the scale at which they are producing? All of these things we need to understand before we can make a determination that yes, we need to go into the production of banana chips. So it is one thing to say we need to add value to our banana. The next set of steps is to do the analysis to be able to determine where along the value chain. Is it that we need to produce flour with the banana? Is it that we need to do chips? What are the range of possibilities based on not just current market trends, but projected market trends? Where is demand in the world going globally with respect to the products that can come out of this raw material that we in fact have?
And I want to stick on bananas for a bit because clearly it's a product, it's a produce that drove the economy of St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
Speaks to St. Vincent.
Yes, it does. Are we not sometimes maybe guilty of just getting hooked on the idea that because bananas once worked for you, it must continue to work? Albeit you evolve it to produce different things that, as you say, address the value chain.
That's right.
But can't we sit back and analyze, basically, yes, we had bananas, and even if you improve on the value chain, that may not be the solution either.
Yeah, and you're very correct, and that is the end result of the analysis that I'm talking about, and allowing you to make a decision based on information and proper information rather than just making a decision based on the sentimentality and the historical connection that we have had with banana. So maybe at the end of the day, what we realize is that we really should just be focusing on producing bananas for our domestic economy. Maybe that's where it will lead us.
That's the conclusion.
That's right. And maybe we need to convert our banana plantations into the production of other things. And from my understanding, a lot of that has already started to happen in
does
St. Vincent.
the Center for Competitiveness interact with governments? I suppose that's what you do. And how do you deal with the challenges that the politicians themselves must present to you? Because you brought up that word sentimentality, and politicians constantly play to the sentiments of people. So here, I keep bananas on the table for now. Here it is, whatever the government of the day in St. Vincent is, one's going to preach that we can save this crop, and the other one's going to say, you've killed it, you know? And that is clearly politics, right? And none of them would say, hold on, after doing the analysis, an honest analysis, we can't go forward with bananas in the way that you think we can go forward. How do you get around those challenges? Because clearly they're thrown at you.
But you ask me to put on a political hat now and answer from the position of a politician.
Do that, because I understand you once were.
Well, from a political perspective, we have to understand that a politician has his objective, his or her objective set, and he's operating within a 5-year window where he needs to go back to the electorate.
Indera,
so he has to deal with it. That's a reality. The issue is that development is not, there's no quick fix to development. So in my view, the politician needs to understand he needs to do two things simultaneously. He needs to look for the short-term quick wins and the quick fixes that he needs that will sustain him in his political ambitions. But at the same time, simultaneously, he needs to recognize, so I'm really talking about a new breed of politician that is required. He needs to recognize that simultaneous to doing that, he has to put things in place to treat with the issue of long-term sustainable development. So if we come back to the issue of banana, of course, can you imagine a time when St. Vincent is not at all producing bananas? So that, it makes no sense to suggest that, because bananas has intrinsic value.
Right.
Yeah, so that it allows him to answer that question and remain committed to the development of the banana industry. But where he needs to make the harder decision is how much and for whom and are we going to be producing, so that I support the banana industry to continue to produce the fresh banana fruit that this domestic economy can in fact absorb. Do you currently import any bananas?
Well, we don't.
You don't.
No.
But the region imports bananas. So why is it? Okay, so we cannot look at exporting anymore in any big way to Europe and to the United States. But what about the region? What about the 5 million people that live within the space that we call the Caribbean? Why is it I cannot position my banana? And branding now becomes important, because I have to be able to sell the fact that the banana that's produced in St. Vincent is not the same thing that you are getting from the mass producers in Latin America. It's not the same product. It is sweeter, it is coming to you fresh, and therefore you have to be prepared to pay a higher price. So branding now becomes very important, so that you can in my view, you can satisfy both objectives, and I do not see them as competing. I see them as complementing each other, and I see there are the short-term objectives that you have that are quite noble, and it sits next to the longer-term objectives.
Indera, we're going to take a break at this point. When I come back, I want us to continue to look at your Center for Competitiveness, and I'm intrigued by the way you are addressing the politics of the region, which you cannot avoid, and we're going to have some more discussion on that when we come back. This is Unrendered on IKTV. My guest is Mrs. Indera Sagewan-Alli. More with her when we come back.